An Undeceptions podcast.
Salvation is here. Feeling inarticulate, critically gauche, or just verbally impotent? We here at Pixmaven have developed the Instant Art Critique Phrase Generator, so you need never again feel at a loss for pithy commentary or savvy insights. With this device, you can speak about art with both authority and confidence. Use this marvelous tool to amaze and confound friends and colleagues. Don't miss this opportunity to menace and dumbfound professors and artists emeriti. The instructions are simple. Type any 5-digit number in the field below, click Create, and enjoy your ready-made critical response to the art product, or crap. Now you can produce crap critiques as easily and fluently as anyone in your MFA program. Okay, Kaley, have a go.
All right, so please enter your number here. 5, 6, 4, 7, 8. Create art critique. Voila! Your instant critical response to the art product, or crap, is here. Although I am not a painter, I think that the iconicity of the facture notates the substructure of critical thinking.
Well, that sounds like crap to me.
Let's do another one. With regard to the issue of content, the disjunctive perturbation of the...
That's producer Kaley and director Mark having fun with an online text generator created in 2012 to make fun of art critics. We're talking about art and beauty in this episode, but you can be sure we're not going to be using words like transversal and visuality. Because beauty ought to be something that's universal and accessible to everyone. The question, what is beauty, has been of interest since the earliest ancient philosophers even began asking questions. It's often considered an essential ingredient to the good life. No beauty, no joy, no imagination, no transcendence. So knowing what beauty is, where it comes from, and what it points toward are important life pursuits. Now, we're not going to be able to answer all the deep questions in this episode, but our guests today are experts in beauty, showing beauty, explaining how beauty influences us, and what it can show us about life itself. I'm John Dickson, and this is a beautiful Undeceptions episode. Undeceptions is brought to you by Zondervan's new book, The Beauty Chasers, by Timothy Willard. Each episode at Undeceptions, we explore some aspect of life, faith, history, science, culture, or ethics that's either much misunderstood or mostly forgotten. And with the help of people who know what they're talking about, we're trying to undeceive ourselves and let the truth out. This episode of Undeceptions is brought to you by Zondervan Academic's new book, Jesus and the Powers, by N.T. Wright and Undeceptions' favourite, Mike Bird. Should Christianity have anything to do with politics? I mean, you could argue that Christians have done more harm than good once they get a whiff of power. Mike Bird and N.T. Wright address this question and other questions in this magnificent overview of the political implications of the Christian faith and the Church's historical engagement with the powers and principalities. They shed light on current geopolitical events and ask, what would it look like if there were a faithful Christian response to crises like the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the China-Taiwan tension, political turmoil in the US, UK and Australia, and the problem of Christian nationalism. They build a pretty convincing case that Jesus' teaching about the kingdom of God confronts all forms of power, Christian and atheist, and calls on us all to support a pluralistic democracy where everyone, regardless of religion or irreligion, has a role to play in working toward the good of society. Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, I'd say this book will be an eye-opener. You can order Jesus and the Powers on Amazon, of course, or head to zondervanacademic.com/undeceptions to dig a little deeper and see if you really like it. That's zondervanacademic.com/undeceptions. I want to ask, high art is often thought of as, inaccessible, just for the middle-class nerd. So how can all of this stuff connect to ordinary people, ordinary life?
So I grew up in a farming community, a small town in Indiana. And when I was writing this book, so my exposure to art was not high-minded, erudite, philosophical city folk. It was soybean farmers. And our town had a pork festival, so for me, I think I wanted to approach art from the perspective of, if I handed these essays to the farmer down the street, would he feel like I went way over his head, or would he feel like that was a good time? That was a good time reading that. So that was what I was aiming for, I think.
That's Russ Ramsey. He's an author and a Christian pastor from Nashville, Tennessee. His latest book is called Rembrandt is in the Wind: Learning to Love Art Through the Eyes of Faith. He recently started Art Wednesday on his social pages, posting a series of 9 works grouped either by artist or theme to encourage people to interact with beauty, he says. This can be an ugly world, he writes, and we need to be reminded of its wonder and glory.
I think it's a very valid form of art criticism to stand in front of a painting and say, I really like this one. And it's a valid form of art criticism to stand in front of a painting and say, I don't get this one. And I don't think you have to know a whole lot more, but the joy of taking in art is that you have a lifetime to do it. And so you don't have to, and you develop a vocabulary, and you develop an understanding of kind of techniques that people use in order to communicate things.
Russ is not a formal art critic. He's just a guy who loves art and decided to write a bunch of essays on the artists he loves and what they've taught him about the world and about faith. The essays are now a book, and I highly recommend you get it. I'm gonna say an artist's name and from mentioned in your book, and you're just gonna give me 1 or 2 sentences that sums them up.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Michelangelo.
Extremely confident and arrogant and angry, and perhaps the greatest artist the world has ever known.
You call Michelangelo's David statue the most perfect work of art ever achieved by any one of us. Well, okay. You're going to have to justify that. Tell me, why?
Okay, listen.
I mean, I think it's pretty, but
I know. Let me get the wording precise. Okay, the wording is: I believe that Michelangelo's David is the single greatest artistic achievement by an individual in the history of humankind. Now, I have some rationale for this, but before I even give the rationale, I am fully aware that is an absurd thing to say. I know it's ridiculous. My invitation is, give me the substitute. Tell me if it's not David, then what is it? And some quick hits on that. Don't show me a painting, because it's 2-dimensional, and I'm talking about an achievement. So the technical achievement of it. And don't show me a bronze sculpture, because this is marble. All you can do with marble is subtract. You can't add to it. And so it's unforgiving. Don't show me a marble sculpture of a horse, because the naked human form is the most complex thing to get right, carving it out of a single piece of stone where you can't make any corrections. And so when I think about it on that level, and I have to qualify, Michelangelo's David is not my favorite piece of art. I don't even know if it cracks my top 10 in terms of favorites, but I stand in awe of it. Because of the achievement of it.
Russ isn't the only one to say this. The esteemed artist and historian Giorgio Vasari wrote, "No other artwork is equal to it in any respect. With such just proportion, beauty and excellence did Michelangelo finish it." It depicts the biblical figure of King David, of course. The Florentines loved David as a symbol of their culture. He represents courage, strength and perseverance, the same things they saw in themselves. Michelangelo made his David obviously uncircumcised, so that too is perhaps a projection of Catholic Florence onto an ancient Jew, which is kind of weird. But anyway, Michelangelo created his David from a single block of marble, somewhere between 1501 and 1504. He was only 26 years old when he got the commission. The statue was destined to be one in a series that would line the roof of the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. The famous dome of the cathedral still pierces the cityscape of Florence today. I love Florence. Shout out to any listeners there. But once the piece was finished, it was clear it was going nowhere because it was impossible to lift. So the statue of David took its place in the nearby palace. It now sits in the Galleria dell'Accademia. By the way, in 2015, a Melbourne family added a 4-metre concrete copy of the statue of David to their front yard, much to the dismay of the neighbours. The statue was called vulgar, tacky, an eyesore. Fair enough. Perhaps beauty is also partly about context and originality. Can we go briefly philosophical? Okay. What is beauty? And I guess I want to say, is it an objective thing or is it purely subjective matter of taste?
Well, it can't be purely subjective because it's universal, right? And so if beauty is something that that beckons a human being to engage, which is one of the things beauty does. By nature, it attracts. So we are drawn to beauty, whether it's, me seeing my wife for the first time in college and perking up, or us, getting in our vehicle and driving to see, the Grand Canyon, or flying across the ocean to visit the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland. There's something about a pull that beauty has that draws us as human beings toward it. As a Christian, I believe that beauty is a reflection of the nature and character of the Creator of the world. That beauty reflects the one who made the world that we live in, and so there's an element of that where when we engage with beauty, it's a kind of engaging with God. And so we're not just philosophical but theological, I suppose. But
well, all good philosophy ends up theological, so
doesn't it? Yeah. So yeah, I think beauty is one of those things. I think it also beauty is something that works in our lives to show us places where we're wrong about things. This is an idea that Mako Fujimura shared with me. He's an artist in New York City, and that he got from a woman named Elaine Scarry, who wrote a book called On Beauty and Being Just. And she talks about how beauty shows us where we're wrong, that you can form a kind of a prejudicial impression of a place or a people or a food or a culture. But if you experience it, if you get up close to it, if you immerse yourself in it, you will find how small your vision was, and the beauty of a custom, the beauty of a flavor or a dish or a kind of music being performed for you in person it'll humble us.
When we talk about purpose and utility, we kind of miss the mark.
And that is Makoto Fujimura, a leading contemporary artist and author. He's well known for his process-driven, refractive, slow art. New York Times writer David Brooks called his process, quote, a small rebellion against the quickening of time. Makoto's work imbues feelings of hope, of healing, redemption, and refuge. And he travels the world as an international advocate for the arts. He's also very public about his Christian faith. And his latest book is called Art Plus Faith, a theology of making. I was super excited to get him on the podcast.
Because God is the artist, God is beauty, and therefore art exists simply as a reflection of God's being. And so we don't have to justify it as if it needs a purpose, because it is at the heart of creation. And by what I mean by that is actually it counters the Darwinian struggle that we find ourselves in the survival game, scarcity mindset, zero-sum game that we play. And Jesus, stands on the hill of Galilee, reminding us to consider the lilies of the field, look at the birds of the air. And we ask, like, why? We need to survive. Give us, something practical and purposeful, And yet Jesus says, no, the whole creation is based on abundance. Remember the creation which was given to you as a gift, with really no purpose other than its own existence as abundant beauty and this heart of God, which is love, and love will create generatively in creating sometimes very what one might call useless things. When we go on a date, we don't do oftentimes purpose-driven things. We do unnecessary things. And that shows that at the heart of love is this gratuitous beauty, abundance that is given to us as a gift. And we want to give that to each other. And so I would think, art belongs in that gift territory, that we are given creation and ourselves, our lives, as a gift from the Creator, and we are simply to return that. If we love anything, that means we are creating into the from the abundant mindset into new creation.
It's a bit like at the relational level, true friendship, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
True
absolutely.
friendship isn't about utility.
Yes.
In fact, there's something, if you are using someone to some end, it's not friendship. It's a really strange thing.
Yeah, and C.S. Lewis says, Phileos, the friendship, is the highest of the loves, and I think that what you just noted is exactly why it is gratuitous, it is excessive, it is something that we have as counter to survival, but oftentimes that very thing, that excess of creation, is what saves us at the end.
Philosophers have long suggested that one of the things that makes us distinctly human is our desire, our longing for goodness, truth, and beauty. Peter Kreeft is the Catholic philosopher we featured recently for the Kingdom Come episode. He writes that goodness, truth, and beauty are the only three things that we never get bored with and never will for all eternity, because they are three attributes of God, and therefore attributes of all God's creation. He's echoing a long philosophical tradition in Christian theology, and even before. These are universal properties built into creation. Everything in creation participates to some degree in goodness, truth, and beauty. The 5th century genius, Saint Augustine, you knew we were going to slip him in here, writes about beauty in his classic De Veritate Religione, of true religion. And he poses the question, are things beautiful because they give us delight, or do they give us delight because they are beautiful? He emphatically opts for the second. Beauty is an objective thing built into the creation, and it calls out to us. It produces in us a transcendent kind of joy. Something similar was said by pagan philosophers too. The 3rd century Greek thinker Plotinus wrote, "This is the spirit that beauty must ever induce, wonderment and a delicious trouble, longing and love, and a trembling that is all delight." I love that idea. Beauty isn't just pleasurable. It produces in us a longing. And often it's not just a longing for the beautiful object itself, it's a longing for something the beautiful object points to beyond itself. You say that beauty is good for us. How? What does it do to us?
One of the things I think that beauty does in our lives is it I don't know, it without it, our lives would become pretty sterile. Our relationships would become boring. Our work would become perfunctory and a means to an end. But if we look at life through the lens of beauty is everywhere, Rich Mullins, the late Rich Mullins, the singer-songwriter, said there's so much beauty around us for just two eyes to see, but everywhere I go, I'm looking. I think that's the mandate for us, is to say, as people who have the capacity to notice beauty, which human beings really are the only thing walking around sentient enough to notice beauty and pause and linger and take it in. And as people who are, as beings who are engaging with beauty for beauty's sake. And I think that's a unique thing. It would be a shame if we lived our lives in such a way that we just cut that part out.
Caravaggio,
a paradox of profanity and wonder. He created these works of art that are these transcendent pictures of biblical truth, and between painting those things, drank, stole, and murdered people.
Maybe I should have drilled down on that one. Sadly, we can't dwell long on Caravaggio, but he's a late 16th, early 17th century Italian painter, and he was quite the character. One of his biographers put it like this: after a fortnight's work, he will swagger about for a month or two with a sword at his side and a servant following him, from one ball court to the next, ever ready to engage in a fight or an argument, so that it is most awkward to get along with him. Even still, Caravaggio was hugely influential. His religious art juxtaposed the sacred and the profane. According to Russ Ramsey, Caravaggio was moved by the power of Christ to change people's hearts. Russ writes, "The theme of the sinner's need for rescue and Christ's power to give it runs through his entire body of work. It was a story he told over and over again throughout his entire life, presumably because he kept needing to hear it." Fair enough. Hey, anyone who travels to Europe sees a lot of religious art, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what's all that about? When was this really religious art most popular, and why?
Well, we live in a time now where you can have a Kindle and you can get books, online and carry around a library on your phone. But there was a time when books weren't widely dispersed. And so the ones that tended to be were scripture and mythology. These tended to be the stories that everybody had access to. And so it follows that art would draw on ubiquitous stories. And so that's why you can have painters who, by just looking biographically at their lives, you would wonder, is this person a person of faith, or were they just kind of a licentious scoundrel with a gift, And
Caravaggio.
Caravaggio would be an example, and I certainly would not want to pass any judgment on the quality of his soul, because I think part of my hope as a Christian is that walking contradictions can be redeemed, which is good news.
Did he do the Doubting Thomas? Where
the incredulity of St. Thomas,
incredulity,
finger where Christ is guiding Thomas's finger into the wound in his side.
It is hard to look at that and think this guy doesn't understand this.
Yeah.
Was the church only interested in art for religious sake, or for the sake of art and beauty itself? Because some would just say, the church only sponsored art because it was trying to propagandize.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's both. I think that when you look at particularly like the era of the Reformation, the Catholic Church leaned heavy into creating art during that period, and one of the reasons they did that was because Protestant churches, Reformed churches, were very critical of any kind of representation of God or Jesus, or really art itself was kind of seen as garish and
Well,
and so
Presbyterians took a lot of paintings down in churches, did they not?
yes, and shame on us for that. But yeah, I think.
So, what to say about the Reformation in 2 minutes, which is all producer Kaley is giving me. The 16th century Reformation was a kind of back to basics movement, at first within the Catholic Church, and then, of course, as a breakaway from the Catholic Church. Perhaps the key idea that drove the Protestant Reformation was a return to the original simplicity of the Christian faith. It was, in fact, part of a larger European movement known as humanism, which was also interested in going back to the original sources, including the Greek and Latin sources of antiquity. The Christian version of humanism that gave us the Protestant Reformation was eager to go back to the original words of the apostles in the New Testament, rather than rely on the accumulated traditions of the centuries. As a result of this general outlook, there was an overreaction against beauty and art in the Protestant tradition. In trying to make sure people were not distracted by images in their worship of God and stuck to the Word of God, Protestants have generally had less interest in art. Sorry about that.
But there was a combination of it, right? Like it was certainly used to inspire awe, to draw the eye, to as a means of biblical literacy in a culture where people didn't widely have couldn't read, where they could see the images. Bono talks about stained glass in those old European churches as the first movies. Pictures through light and color. And but it was also a way of, in a way, it was a sport. Like certain churches would hire certain prominent artists to do the popular works that they would feature in their foyer, and then so that church would have a Botticelli, but this other church might have a Michelangelo, or and so it was used for that. So it's a combination, right? And nothing is really ever that pure.
Yeah.
And the church has been a part of that, and of course a lot of the Renaissance art and stuff like that. There wasn't much of a distinction between church and state in those times when it came to power and governing people and affluence and wealth and things that would dazzle were of value to draw people in.
There's a sense in which the Enlightenment, not just the Reformation, was responsible for a further diminution of art and beauty. Enlightenment thinkers like David Hume and Immanuel Kant, in different ways and to different degrees, chipped away at the idea that beauty was an objective fact of the world. They said that beauty was as much, or perhaps even more, in our heads than in the world. It's in the eye of the beholder, as the expression goes. The Enlightenment not only stressed human subjectivity in this way, it also focused our attention, rightly in some ways, much more on practical knowledge, the natural sciences, technology, utility, and ultimately industry. And there's not much place in these things for beauty. Beauty in this context is seen as a luxury. Will we ever recover our thirst for beauty in the church or society?
I have hope. But I think that we're cyclical by nature as a species, that nothing is new under the sun. But I do have hope that we've been through a few generations, I think, of trying to figure out the right way and do things the right way, and generations of trying pragmatism and capitalism and things that would put our footing underneath us and establish us forever so we wouldn't have need of anything. But as the world grows more and more complex, and as we gain more and more access through technology to sad and horrific things happening around the world, our appetite for beauty, our need for it, will increase.
But I really come to believe, any effort to define beauty misses the mark, or anything that tries to make beauty outside of the centrality of who we are and our existence. We tend to marginalize beauty as a result of that.
So what do you make of that tradition in art that's really quite modern? I can't think of it being a medieval or ancient thing, that is almost a protest against beauty. It's almost a counter.
Right. And that's connected with our alienation of contemporary society to the source of beauty, who is God. But also it's an alienation to oneself. We're disconnected from the very source of how we connect with ourselves. So as a result, we are very suspicious of beauty in general. Now, many artists who protest against beauty are protesting against the Western notion of beauty, which can be very much superficially, heavy laden with Western idealism. But as you may know, my definition has much to do with Japanese way of understanding beauty, which is connected to sacrifice. So it's a very different way of looking at beauty.
So can you give us that as a counterpoint to the Western idea of beauty?
Sure. Beauty in Japan is connected to sacrifice and death. The Chinese ideogram used for beauty is comprised of two Chinese characters or ideograms. It's sheep on top of character for great. So Japanese aesthetic philosophers have traced this and said that in Japan, around 11th century, the idea of beauty, which came in from China, which was fat sheep, big sheep, that is, something to celebrate in autumn festivals as a blessing, has become more known, connected with sacrifice, the idea of sacrifice. So the great sheep is a sacrifice of anything, nature, or even ourselves. And so I note in my book, Silence and Beauty, that this idea of great sacrifice, great lamb being sacrificed is connected with Christ, and the redemptive, what is hidden in Japanese culture is this always this idea that someone has to be sacrificed for our sakes.
And yet Western art seems to be more fixated in its traditional form with life and creation rather than sacrifice. Would that be accurate?
Kind of a perfectionism, this immaculate understanding of thinking about anything, including beauty, to be perfection of our image. That's very Platonic, Greek idea. But so industrial revolution has done a lot to this idea, which is, whenever you improve upon the old, a new iPhone is, considered to be perfect for a moment, right? And then you have the next version, which is, as opposed to a Japanese notion, which is, which can enter through something, through imperfection or brokenness or sacrifice. And to me, that way of thinking is more accurate to the biblical notion of beauty and goodness.
I've forgotten the name of that incredible Japanese style of mending broken things. What's it called again, and what's its significance?
it's called kintsugi, but kintsugi, kin is gold and tsugi is to mend, but it's also to pass on to the next generation. And when an important tea vessel breaks because of many earthquakes that Japan has, often the family of tea masters will hold on to the fragments for several generations, and they will give it to Japan urushi or Japan lacquer master to mend, but they don't fix it to restore it as if nothing's happened. They actually accentuate the fissures and brokenness and create instead a river of gold through it, or lightning, or a mountain, creating a landscape using gold in a place of where the fracture or where the fissures remain. So they're actually accentuating the imperfections and then making it more beautiful. The resulting kintsugi bowl is far more valuable than the original, even as valuable as the original may have been. And to me, this is a great example of a new creation. When the Bible talks about Jesus' post-resurrection appearance, Jesus appears as a human being, but also as a wounded human being. And his nail marks are still there. Thomas, asks to touch it. He doesn't. He worships instead once he realizes that his question was turned into an invitation into new creation. And so by his wounds we are healed. And we are brought into this understanding of new creation through the nail marks of Christ. And that to me is very much what kintsugi can represent.
From the 15th century Italian Renaissance to ancient Japanese practices, we've travelled far and wide in the pursuit of beauty. And we've got further to go, from a brilliant female British painter who finds herself in northern Africa at the turn of the 20th century to a studio in 21st century New York. Stick with us after the break.
How am I going?
Good.
Okay.
I'm going good too.
Yes, you are.
And no white spaces.
No white spaces. Is that important?
Yeah, that's important.
That's producer Kaley and her 5-year-old son on one of their crafternoons. Like most households with young kids, Kaley's dining table is a mess of paper and textures, stickers and glue.
We're all artists until third grade, right? And somebody tells us we're not, and we believe them. And we spend the rest of our lives looking for a way to really make something. And we may be very successful in what we do, but what have we made is the ultimate question.
I was really moved by this interview. I think I used to be creative. My first full-time career was writing, recording and performing songs. Not so much anymore. I suppose I still create books and arguments, but it's not the same. I miss creativity, almost with an ache. And not long after my interview with Makoto, I had some weeks off. I mostly read, practiced Latin, went for long walks, but I also wrote a new song. The first song in, let's just say, more than a decade. Don't worry, I'm not going to play it for you. But I don't mind telling you, I cried. The song is no masterpiece, but the whole process of once again creating a melody, chords and lyrics was like falling into the embrace of a long-lost friend. But just in daily life, how to cultivate that pursuit of beauty?
Yeah, I think allowing yourself the permission to stop when something beautiful is happening in front of you or around you, and give yourself, you don't have to give yourself an hour to watch a sunset, but if you give yourself 20 seconds to stand and watch a beautiful sunrise or a beautiful sunset before moving on, the difference that will make in your life versus not giving it that 20 seconds will be, no pun intended, night and day, right? Is that I think there is beauty and grace happening all around us. The question is, do we want to be there for it? And so it's cultivating the habits of trying to pay attention.
Can we talk just practically for a second about your daily practices, in the studio?
I am here in my Princeton studio. It's a horse barn turned into a studio, and I come here every morning. And I have a series of paintings that I started about 2 years ago based on the Psalms. It's 48 inches by 48 inch canvas that every month I take one Psalm and I work on it. So it's going to take me another decade to finish this 150 Psalms. I didn't think about it, when I started it. But that's how I start my day, meditating on the Psalms. And then I have commissions and I have projects that I want to complete. So I work on that. And then in between time, because the process of how I work is slow and layered. There's a painting downstairs that it's probably going to take me 2 years to complete with over 200 layers. And I want it to be a slow process, and it doesn't have any purpose other than me wanting to use this particular azurite pigment that I just got from my dear pigment maker in Japan. And so sometimes it's purposeful, like a commission serving some client or collector. Most of the time it's a meditative, contemplative practice that I get to focus on here in my studio.
Do you push through when you're not feeling the creative juices, or are you just so blessed that you are always feeling creative?
Yeah, there are times when, when you're young, you do wrestle with, when is the work finished, and you want to say everything in a single piece, and then you get to a point where you realize, it's best to stop a work when it's about to give birth to 10 other paintings. So when it's most pregnant, with generative possibilities, and then you work on these 10 other paintings that you want to do. And so I've never had an artist block since I realized that in my 20s, actually, because I don't have time on this side of eternity to finish all the works that I want to do. Making art, making anything is hard work. And you do have to be very disciplined because you're bringing in something invisible on the side of eternity.
In my own heart, I feel like this one needs a drum roll. Rembrandt. Come on, tell me about Rembrandt.
Yes. So when Rembrandt was at his peak, other artists referred to him as the master. So his own contemporaries regarded him as the master. He is one of the most brilliant, enduring painters who was in control. One of the things that's fascinating to me about Rembrandt is when you look at his body of work, which is really, if you're appreciating art, that's a sweet place to get to, is where you're not just appreciating a painting, but you're learning more about a body of work. It's sort of like following Paul Simon, right? And where you know the Simon and Garfunkel songs, but now if you know the stuff he wrote, after 2000, you're like, what a career, and you see this body of work of a person changing. Rembrandt is that way.
I think of Sting the same.
Yeah.
You think the Police, back to Synchronicity, right through to, his amazing multicultural stuff.
But Rembrandt has these, he painted the scene of Joseph and Mary presenting Jesus in the temple, and Simeon is there. It's in Luke chapter 2. And he painted one version, he painted it twice. He painted one version when he was 24 years old. and it will knock your socks off. It's just this elaborate painting of the temple, and the architecture is there. There's over 50 people kind of standing on the steps, which are acting like risers, so you can see all of them as individual pieces. There's this shaft of light coming down, and it's ornate and just takes your breath away. But then the year before he died, when he was, I think he was 60, he was in his 60s, I don't remember exactly, but it was the year before he died, he painted that painting again, and all it is an old man holding a baby. And it's kind of muted in the brushwork. It's not elaborate, and there's a woman standing over the shoulder looking on. And what you see in the trajectory of his kind of growth in life as an artist is in his 20s. He's trying to dazzle. He's trying to show you what he can do. Yeah. But then as an old man, the painting looks like somebody who just wants to hold Jesus. Like, he just wants to, it's intimate in a way that the other was he goes from elaborate to intimate. And from, just technically precise to this kind of warmth.
Do we know anything about his own faith? When some of his paintings, you think, how could this man not have understood things? Yeah. I'm thinking of the prodigal. That prodigal father embracing the son. What do we know of his religion? Yeah,
from what I understand, he was a person of faith, and that his faith and his art were hand in hand. You see it because his prodigal son, even the Return of the Prodigal Son, there's another of the prodigal son off in the far country, and it's a self-portrait. He's there. And the woman that he's got his arm around is his wife, and she died tragically. He buried children. He lost his fortune, and so over the course of his life, he was a man who suffered.
Why does he put himself in paintings? He does it quite a bit, right? Is this just the original selfie, or is there something more profound going on?
Yeah, no. This was a method of evangelism.
Yeah.
This was a way of saying, this story is my story.
Yeah, right.
And when an artist puts themselves in the story, it's a way of them saying, I'm part of this. So he's one of the. There's a raising of the cross painting where he's one of the people raising the cross which Christ is nailed to, and he's there in his kind of typical blue velvet that he paints himself into often. And then when he looks at the viewer, it's not just that he's putting himself in the story, but he's asking the viewer, aren't you in this story too? And so it was very much a way of drawing the viewer into the story and in a pretty pointed way.
Of course, you still, as a regular Christian, have time for reading the Bible and praying. I mean, you're not such an artist that you don't like words as well. Is that right?
Well, word is art, right? I mean, it is. If we understand that God is the artist, I'm not talking about something outside, of essence of and something that is superficial or cosmetic. I'm talking about art that is fundamental to the creator, and that source of all wisdom and beauty is what rejuvenates us, what our souls hunger for, and so when we read the Word of God, we are encountering a portal through which we actually get to tap into that. And God wants to sanctify our imagination so we can be given wings. Not as C.S. Lewis notes, we're not horses that are trained to jump higher and higher of hurdles of moralism. We are creatures with wings. And we have to exercise our wings and imagination and faith in order to fly into the new creation. And so Word of God, prayer, is fundamentally an act of training ourselves to use these parts of us that are growing. And many times when you first try to do this, you land very awkwardly many times. And, it's part of, I think, discipline, but also communal, the church journey is to grow our wings together. And oftentimes that can only happen if we are honest and vulnerable to each other. And as artists are, to be able to look at the world full of fractures and pain, and say, yeah, this day I'm choosing to create something new into the world. And if we can do that together, that will be such a powerful statement in light of what we are experiencing today.
More than 150 years ago, a British woman began her journey to become one of the world's greatest artists. Her mentor was a renowned art critic who believed that technique must be acquired hand in hand with the skill of learning to look. Technique and the gift of looking was something that Lilias Trotter seemed to have in abundance. Lilias Trotter. Now, again, my listeners won't have heard much about her. Why did you choose her for your book?
So Lilias Trotter was a painter who grew up in kind of Victorian London, well-to-do, well-off, talented, and she did watercolors. And there's a art teacher, critic, philosopher, artist named John Ruskin, who lived in London, and he was kind of the if Ruskin put his arm around you and said, "This painter is somebody to pay attention to," everybody took notice. And Lilias's mother, Lilias and her mother, when she was a girl, were staying at a hotel at the same time as that Ruskin was there, and her mother asked Ruskin, "Can I show you some of my daughter's paintings?" And Ruskin was going to endure the request, but wasn't expecting anything to happen. And he was undone by what he saw, particularly that such a young woman would have such a technical precision without any training, that she was doing things the right way, in terms of how art teachers would teach art students how to paint. And he asked if he could keep some of them. He used them as examples for what his art students that he taught should do. And they developed a relationship when he was trying to cultivate her. And he said of her, you can be the most famous living painter in Europe if you pour yourself into this craft, and I can help that happen. But she had this longing to serve the poor. And so she served she served prostitutes in London, and she served poor and disenfranchised women. But then she heard some missionaries talk about Algeria, and particularly she developed a desire to go and minister to the Arabic women of Algeria, a very poor country at that time. And so she sought permission through some mission boards to go, and women missionaries wasn't really a thing unless they were married to a man missionary. And so all the missionary boards denied her. And so she and a couple of her friends decided to just go on their own. And so she basically left what could have been a dazzling career as an artist in the heart of London, to serve the poor on the coast of Africa. And I found her story so compelling for a number of reasons. By no means am I telling that story to say, if you have the choice between being a missionary or an artist, you should choose being a missionary. I don't think that's true. I think if God calls somebody to be an artist with their life, they better not become a missionary, because there's this calling. But one of the things that moved me so much about her story is I started thinking about, okay, here's a woman who had to take something that she was gifted at and had the whole world in front of her, and she basically had to set it down in order to pursue this other calling that she believed was really where the Lord wanted her to go and what she was to do with her life. And so, she didn't marry, she didn't have children. She still painted, but she painted in order to break the language barrier between her and the Arabic women. So she painted as a form of communication, but she wasn't painting masterpieces. She was painting evangelistic tracts, and she was painting, stories of the Bible in order to teach people. And one of her friends commented to a reporter later that even though she was completely confident that she was doing what she was on earth to do as this missionary to these women, that there was a pain that she carried with her over the loss of this artistic expression. And the thing that made me kind of perk up and really want to tell this story is her friend said it wasn't when she wasn't painting that she felt the loss. It was when she picked up her brush to paint that she was acutely aware that she wasn't as good as she used to be, that there was an unfamiliarity to this craft that she used to have a level of mastery over. And I just think who among us doesn't have something like that, where when we were in our teens or in our 20s, we thought, I'm going to do this thing, and it's going to define who people come to know me to be. And then,
I was going to play for Manchester United, just for the record.
Other things.
It didn't work out.
You could have done it too if it wasn't for the podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think that's a compelling story. I like how it's not the happy ending of see, she chose the better path and everything worked out. It was, see, she chose this path and she was content to believe it was faithful, and it still came at a cost, and it still hurt sometimes.
In what way does beauty point to transcendence, point to God?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love this question. I believe that all of us are walking around wondering, is this it? Is this all there is? And I think that I could stand in front of Michelangelo's David even and get to a point where I would say, is this all there is? As transcendent and as beautiful as that may be. C.S. Lewis had a great statement where he said, if we find in ourselves a hunger that nothing in this world can satisfy, then the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. That appetite is there, and it's there because we were made to have that appetite satisfied, that longing satisfied. And if we can't get it satisfied in this world the way that it is, it's because we weren't made for this world in the way that it is. We were made for something more glorious and something more beautiful and something more eternal, and something more whole. And beauty is where we often go to engage with that appetite, and it doesn't, and I don't mean religious art. I mean any art. You could listen to a rock band that you loved in college, and it will stir something in your heart that is transcendent, that is about more than just the notes being played and the rhythm in which they're recorded. That there's something transcendent about it, and art reminds us of that.
And yet you're saying it's not fully satisfying. Like even the best art, it's just like a window to something beyond. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's a foretaste. It's a reminder to us that that's one of the things that beauty does is it makes copies of itself, right? So when you stand in front of a painting, you're going to want to pull out your phone and take a picture of it, or if you stand in front of the Grand Canyon, you might want to get a piece of paper out and sketch it or paint it with watercolors, because there's something about the encounter with that beautiful thing that you want to somehow try to take it with you. And the question that I would just want to ask is, what's that about? What is it about that there's something in us that wants to collect beauty that we can carry around with us and that we can have? And my faith, I believe, it answers that question for me.
I think we all had experience of encountering an artwork or music or theater that spoke something about the mystery of our lives in a way that we didn't expect anybody to understand. It unlocked something deeply within us. And it could be a cinema or movie. You're sitting there, and all of a sudden something breaks open. And if you're not a religious person, or maybe if you're, someone who have not had the experience of going to church or synagogue or mosque or whatever that may be, spiritual path, you wouldn't know what to do with that. But still, poetry and art and music, arts have a way of untapping the mystery of our beings. So in that sense, we're all believers. We believe in the transcendent reality. When we see a sunset, what do we feel, right? When we see fireflies in the dark skies, just skies full of them. Or I'm in Princeton here today, and these spring peepers, these little frogs, just came out today, and I went bounding into my wife's office and said, peepers are out. What makes us so joyful about the spring and the flowers and the birds? These are all common experiences, I think, and in that sense, we all believe in the idea that something can give us this experience of transcendence and hope and joy when frankly, we might be facing a situation which is very bleak.
In one of the endorsements at the front of Russ Ramsey's book, Rembrandt is in the Wind, the best-selling author Leif Enger writes, "Beauty amid the church's moral twilight might be the last apologetic that holds." Ouch. He's saying there's not much left to commend the church to doubters. That maybe goes too far, but there's something in it. But I think Enger is dead right that beauty is a powerful argument on behalf of transcendence. Immanuel Kant, for all of his Enlightenment rigour and critical analysis, thought that beauty was a kind of reverberation in the created order of the elegant mind of the Creator. Paul Draper, a popular agnostic philosopher, once wrote, "Theism is supported by the fact that the universe contains an abundance of beauty." Vincent van Gogh put it like this: "For my part, I know nothing with any certainty, but the sight of the stars makes me dream." His famous Starry Night and Sunflowers point to the beauty of creation, yet his other works explore the beauty that is less easily seen. Van Gogh is now one of the most influential and famous painters of the Western world, but he found beauty in ordinary people and ordinary places. Russ Ramsey says Van Gogh is a paradox. In the thousands of words he wrote in letters, mostly to his brother Theo, Van Gogh revealed his immorality, pride, and anger. But they also show a striving man who, as Russ writes, recognised beauty, wonder, and worth in people in ways few others ever would. And throughout his letters, he never stopped professing his love of Christ, despite his brokenness. Or perhaps because of it. Well, here is my final question. You already confessed earlier on that your favourite artist is Van Gogh.
Yes.
So I guess I want to ask why, and let's just say one painting that exemplifies the best of him.
Okay. So Van Gogh, the reason I love Van Gogh is partially because of the letters. Is because we don't just have work, but we have what he said about the work. So he's one of the greatest resources for understanding the creative process that is available. There are websites that have just his letters organized where you can search them. But Van Gogh had a relentless appetite to capture the beauty in everything that he saw, and he was particularly drawn to scenes of the poor or the working class, or like he was looking for beauty in places where beauty is not known to be found, and he was finding it and he was painting it, and his appetite for it was insatiable. He painted more paintings than anybody else that I know of, like on average, if you were to break down how many paintings per year he painted over the course of his life as an artist, that average is just blows away everybody else. He couldn't find what he was looking for, but he was trying. The painting that I have right here in my office, I raise my eyes from my desk in my pastor's study, is Van Gogh's self-portrait with a bandaged ear.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the one that really kind of got me, because it's a painting. If people know anything about Vincent van Gogh, they probably know that he cut off his ear, and maybe know that he gave it to a prostitute. And then the jokes abound. He painted it while he was in asylum, in a mental institution, recovering from this breakdown that he had. And he paints himself in this moment of vulnerability and shame. And with a painting, you can show whatever you want, right? It's not a photograph. You don't have to hide anything. And so he paints a picture of himself with his wounded side showing. And I think as a human being and as a pastor, that feels like a mandate for me, that I dare not try to present myself to my friends or my congregation as somebody who is completely whole and has everything together. If I have wounded parts of me, I dare not hide those from people, because we all have them. But the mystery and the beauty and the wonder of that particular painting is, here he is capturing himself when he's the most alone he's ever been, the most embarrassed he's ever been, the most destitute that he's ever been. And it's now worth millions. And it hangs in a museum that you can go to visit and stand in front of with your jaw on the floor, because of the honesty and the vulnerability of this masterwork, and there's something that just moves me about the paradox of that, of the fragility of this man in the moment that he captured, being this work of art of inestimable value. And that to me just is so moving.
Well, that's the last episode for the season. We hope you enjoyed it. We're already working hard at planning Season 7 and Season 8 for later in the year, and we'll be back after the season break with more Undeceptions. In the meantime, why not look back through our catalogue and check out some of the episodes you might have missed. Some particularly popular episodes from previous seasons include Resting Well, episode 60, Between Testaments, episode 54, Jesus Philosopher, episode 57, Pro-Life, episode 49, LGBTI Christian, episode 24, and our very first episode, Old Papers, about the manuscripts of the New Testament. Thank you also to the tons of listeners who filled out our first listener survey. It's given us plenty to think about as we plan the coming seasons. And congratulations to Ros Burt and James Allen, who won our Season 6 book and t-shirt packs by completing the survey. We should already have been in touch to get those prizes out to you. Happy reading. A few other things before I go. Can I encourage you to follow the Undeceptions Network Facebook page while we're on our season break? It's where you'll hear first when the next season is ready. Plus lots of other news about the podcast and our other network podcasts. Speaking of our other podcasts, you should definitely subscribe to Small Wonders with Laurel Moffat. She's in the final lap of her first season, and it's one of the most beautiful podcasts out there, I reckon. There's plenty of food for thought in her 15-minute audio essays. And keep an eye out also for With All Due Respect with Michael Jensen and Megan Pal-Dutois. There's plenty more episodes to keep your eager ears busy while we're making the next episodes of Undeceptions. And finally, if you like what we're doing here and you want to support us, please head to undeceptions.com, click the oversized donate button, and go where the wind blows. This season, we've been hovering just below the break-even mark of $3,000 an episode. I personally take nothing from the podcast, but I do have bills and staff to pay. I really appreciate your help. From all of us here at Undeceptions, thank you. See ya. Undeceptions is hosted by me, John Dickson, produced by Kaley, Payne, and directed by Mark Van Gogh Hadley. Editing by Richard Hamwi, social media by Sophie Hawkshaw, and executive assistance by Lyndie Leviston. Undeceptions is the flagship podcast of undeceptions.com, letting the truth out. An Undeceptions podcast.